Imagine you're sitting in a pressurized metal tube at like 30,000 feet. You're eating one of those lukewarm foil-wrapped meals.
Right, the ones that all kind of taste the same.
Exactly. And you're hurtling through the stratosphere at 500 miles an hour, and somehow you are completely, utterly bored.
It is pretty wild when you think about it.
I mean, you literally pull down the window shade to block out the glare of the sun just so you can watch, I don't know, a movie on a 6-inch screen.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder how the absolute miracle of human flight became this tedious chore that we just try to endure.
It really does. Well, welcome to a new deep dive. Today, we're looking at this really fascinating piece of writing from the blog, A Bus on a Dusty Road.
And this post really challenges that modern instinct we all have, right? That instinct to treat the journey as just this annoying obstacle between you and your destination.
Yeah, and the author of the source material, Anita L. Hummel, she brings a really unique lens to this. She's not just your average weekend tourist.
No, not at all. She's a cultural anthropologist, for one. Plus, she's a certified sailor and a seasoned expat.
Right, she spent over 30 years living in Asia, kind of splitting her time between Hanoi and Milwaukee, which is quite the contrast.
Oh, for sure. And because of that deep anthropological background, she approaches transit totally differently, not as a logistical problem to be solved,
But as a rich cultural text to be read. She advocates for this concept called slow travel.
Which sounds lovely in theory, right?
Yeah, but to truly grasp what she means, I kind of think about how travel functions in a video game.
Oh, that's a good analogy, like the fast travel mechanics.
Exactly. Modern air travel is the real-world equivalent of fast traveling on a map. You click a button, the screen goes dark, and you instantly teleport to the next major city.
Right. It's highly efficient, but you completely miss all the experience points.
You miss the random encounters, the hidden loot scattered across the landscape. You arrive at the destination, but you have no physical or psychological context for how you actually got there.
And that gap in context is what anthropologists and psychologists refer to as liminal space. It's that transitional threshold between one state and another.
And modernity has basically declared war on liminal space, hasn't it?
Totally. We view it as dead air. I mean, look at airports. They're specifically engineered to erase the friction of distance.
Yeah, whisking you from a check-in kiosk to a boarding gate in this seamless flow.
But when you bypass that physical transition, you pay a psychological cost. Flying strips away the gradual shift in local architecture.
Oh, wow, yeah. You don't see the subtle changes in the color of the dirt or hear the slow morphing of dialects.
Exactly. You land in a new time zone, but your brain hasn't actually traveled. It's just been relocated.
I hear that, but I have to play devil's advocate for a second here. Because we aren't 19th century aristocrats on a 6-month grand tour,
True. Time is the ultimate luxury.
Right. And for someone with exactly 14 days of paid time off for the entire year, efficiency is basically a survival mechanism.
Oh, absolutely.
So why on earth would a working parent justify spending 2 full days bouncing around on a dusty bus smelling like diesel exhaust when they could just fly there in 3 hours?
So they can spend that extra time exploring the Louvre or relaxing on a beach.
Yeah.
I totally get that. That is the defining tension of modern tourism.
Yeah, we just don't have the time.
We operate under this scarcity mindset regarding time, which kind of forces us to prioritize the quantity of destinations over the depth of the experience.
But Hummel's anthropological perspective suggests that the dusty bus isn't actually a waste of time.
Right. She argues it's a different category of experience altogether. When you choose the ground level, slower option, you're forced into a state of humility.
Humility, I like that. Because you're no longer royalty floating above the clouds in this climate-controlled, curated bubble.
Exactly. You become subject to the landscape.
You're trading the illusion of control for actual presence. And the source material has this brilliant example about a local bus grinding to a halt.
Oh, the cows.
Yes. A massive herd of cows is just blocking the dirt road. Or the driver arbitrarily decides to pull over for 30 minutes to chat with a roadside snack vendor.
And if you're operating on that hyper-optimized 14-day itinerary mindset,
You're going to have a panic attack. I know I would. Your heart rate spikes, you're checking your watch, you're calculating the cascading failure of your dinner reservations.
which is exactly why that herd of cows is a psychological masterclass.
Wait, really? A masterclass?
Yeah, because what's happening in your brain in that moment is a forced collision between your expectations and reality.
Okay, break that down for me.
So in our daily lives, our brains are constantly running on beta waves. That's that high-frequency state associated with active problem-solving, planning, and, well, stress.
Right, we constantly demand instant gratification.
Exactly. But sitting on that stalled bus, you cannot move the cows. You can't fire the driver.
So your beta wave planning state is rendered completely useless.
Precisely. So the brain has to either stay in a state of high-stress friction or it has to surrender.
And surrender is kind of the core mechanism of slow travel, isn't it?
It really is. When you finally accept that you are not in charge, your brain shifts out of that stressful planning mode.
It drops into an alpha or theta wave state.
Yes, which is associated with relaxed observation and sensory processing. You stop fighting the delay and start actually looking out the window.
Wow, so that forced pause builds a type of cognitive resilience. You learn how to exist in a state of uncertainty without interpreting it as an emergency.
And the moment that internal anxiety drops, your focus shifts outward. Because you aren't staring at an in-flight entertainment screen, you look around the interior of the bus.
And Hummel describes these local transit routes as the arteries of local life, which is such a great phrase.
It is. From an anthropological standpoint, a local bus is a concentrated microcosm of society.
Because you aren't surrounded by other tourists reading the exact same guidebook.
Right. You're shoulder to shoulder with students reviewing homework, farmers transporting goods, elders heading to a regional market.
The physical proximity is really crucial here. That shared liminal space creates an immediate temporary drive.
Yeah, when you're crammed into a tight, bumpy space, the social barriers that normally separate a tourist from a local just kind of dissolve.
Like a shared groan when the bus hits a massive pothole.
Exactly. Or passing a bag of local fruit across the aisle. It acts as a social lubricant.
So you bypass the transactional nature of most tourist interactions, like, ordering food from a waiter or buying a ticket from a vendor.
And instead, you engage in genuine peer-to-peer human connection.
It transforms the transit from a waiting room into a moving theater. And your gaze naturally extends past the passengers to the window.
And the altitude really matters here. From 30,000 feet, a farm is just a geometric green square.
Right. But from the window of a bus moving 30 miles an hour, you actually see the physical labor of the farmer.
You see the informal, bustling markets that definitely don't exist on Google Maps.
You see the way rivers shape the layout of a valley over millennia. And your brain is given the processing time to actually encode these details into long-term memory.
Which brings up the profound difference between consuming a culture and integrating into it.
Oh, that's a big distinction.
Yeah. When we fly somewhere to check 3 famous landmarks off a list, we are consuming the destination.
But when we take the local transit, we're observing the invisible infrastructure that makes that culture actually function.
Exactly. And to really drive home how the physical environment dictates our psychological state, Hummel shares this incredibly vivid case study from her own life.
Right. She contrasts the experience of navigating the streets of Hanoi, Vietnam in the back of a rental car versus riding a moped.
Yes. In the backseat of a car, you're technically in the city, but you're experiencing it through a filter.
Oh, for sure. The glass windows, the steel doors, the air conditioning, they act as a sensory deprivation chamber.
The city just becomes a television show playing outside your window. The car provides safety, but that safety insulates you from consequence and connection.
But when she transitions to the moped, the physical barriers vanish, and the psychological barriers go right along with them.
On a moped, you are thrust into the chaotic, vibrant reality of the traffic. You are vulnerable to the elements, the sudden stops, the proximity of other drivers.
The sensory exposure is just absolute. She writes about the smell of specific street foods hitting you as you bank around a corner.
Yeah, and the distinct vocal cadence of vendors shouting over the engine noise, the blast of humid air.
And because the speed is localized, you notice the micro details that a car blurs right past, like the intricate weathered patterns on tiled roofs.
Or the fading pastel paint on French colonial buildings. You make direct, unfiltered eye contact with a stranger carrying a massive load of flowers on their own bike.
And that eye contact is where the magic happens, right?
It really is. Neuroscientists talk about mirror neurons. Those are the brain cells that fire both when we act and when we observe the same action performed by someone else.
They're essentially the biological foundation of empathy.
Exactly. When you're hermetically sealed in a car, those mirror neurons aren't fully engaged by the people outside.
But on a moped, sharing the same physical risk, breathing the same air, navigating the same chaotic intersection, your brain recognizes the shared humanity.
You're transformed from a passive spectator into an active participant in the city's pulse. You literally cannot zone out.
No, vulnerability demands absolute presence. If you pull out your phone to check emails while navigating a roundabout in Hanoi, you're going to crash.
You really are. And that forced presence transitions us into the deeper philosophical framework of the source material.
Because slow travel isn't just a life hack for cheaper bus fares.
No, it's an active cognitive state built on 3 specific pillars: presence, curiosity, and openness.
Let's break those down. Presence is obviously the foundation. It's the conscious refusal to live 15 minutes in the future.
And curiosity is what naturally emerges when presence is sustained. Once the noise of your itinerary fades, the brain seeks engagement.
Like, you see a village from the train window, and instead of just seeing a cluster of houses, you start asking questions.
Right. You ask about the socioeconomic realities of that region. Why are the roofs shaped like that? What's the primary crop?
You shift from a passive consumer of scenery to an active seeker of knowledge.
And then openness is the adaptability required when the answers to those questions inevitably derail your plans.
It's the psychological flexibility to say, okay, the train broke down, but because I'm present and curious, I'm going to walk into this village and see what happens.
Hummel argues that practicing these 3 pillars on the road fundamentally alters your character.
It builds empathy by breaking down that us versus them mentality that luxury resorts kind of foster.
It also cultivates a profound sense of simplicity, which has a very literal physical manifestation in how we pack.
Oh, yes. Hummel is very adamant about the necessity of traveling light.
And from a cognitive load perspective, this is fascinating. Every physical object you carry requires a certain amount of mental bandwidth to manage.
The cognitive load of luggage is so real.
Right.
We've all experienced that unique panic of staring at a massive suitcase.
Agonizing over whether to pack a 3rd pair of dress shoes.
Yes. Just in case we magically get invited to a diplomatic gala while hiking the Andes, we try to pack for every conceivable alternate reality.
And we end up dragging 50 pounds of anxiety through a cobblestone street.
It's the worst. And the physical weight of that suitcase literally taxes your working memory.
It does. When you're physically exhausted from lugging unnecessary items and mentally preoccupied with not losing them, your brain simply does not have the processing power left.
Right. You don't have the bandwidth to notice the faded colonial architecture or engage in a spontaneous conversation with a local vendor.
By carrying only what you absolutely need, you are literally freeing up neurological RAM. You gain physical agility, which translates directly into psychological agility.
You stop managing your possessions and start experiencing your environment. It's basically addition by subtraction.
Exactly. By stripping away the heavy luggage, the tight itinerary, and the insulated rental cars, you're making room for the actual culture to get in.
When you synthesize all these elements, the trip stops being a frantic scavenger hunt for photo ops. It becomes a rich, interconnected tapestry.
You start to see how history, geography, and daily human struggle all weave together. The journey becomes a mirror for life itself.
Because life, at its core, is liminal space, isn't it?
It is. We are always in transition. We are always between destinations.
And if we train ourselves to only value the arrival, we spend our entire lives frustrated by the transit.
Which is a pretty profound realization.
It really is. Which brings us to the practical application. How do we actually implement this anthropological mindset on our next trip?
Well, the source material offers several concrete strategies. The first is the most obvious. Intentionally downgrade your transit.
Right. Whenever it's safe and feasible, choose the local train over the domestic flight. Choose the bicycle over the taxi.
And choose walking over everything else. Second, you have to build buffer zones into your schedule.
This is so important. If you book a local transit option, you just have to assume it won't run on time.
Do not book a tightly wound, non-refundable connection immediately after it. The buffer zone is what prevents a delay from becoming a crisis.
It gives you the emotional space to actually enjoy the detour.
Third, treat conversations as destinations. Don't treat locals as NPCs, non-playable characters in your vacation.
Yeah, take your headphones off. Ask a vendor not just what something costs, but how they made it. The goal is to collect perspectives, not just souvenirs.
I love that. And finally, process the data. Keep a journal or simply sit on a park bench for 20 uninterrupted minutes and actively observe.
Just let your brain synthesize the sights, smells, and interactions of the day, because without reflection, even the most profound experiences fade into a blur.
They really do.
So, as we wrap up this exploration of the dusty road, there is one final, really provocative challenge the source material leaves us with.
Yeah, because we spent this whole time talking about Asia, about
Mm.
crossing continents, about the Andes and Hanoi.
But if the core mechanics of slow travel are truly just presence, curiosity, and embracing the liminal space, do you actually need a passport to do this?
It's a brilliant question. The mechanisms of surrender and observation don't require an international flight.
What would happen if you applied the exact same slow travel mindset to your routine tomorrow morning?
What if you took a slightly longer, unfamiliar route on your commute and actually paid attention to the architecture?
Or what if you walked through your local grocery store with the same intense anthropological curiosity you would bring to a vibrant street market in Vietnam?
You don't need to cross an ocean to change your perspective.
No, you just need to change your pace. We'd love to have you be a part of our community. Please subscribe to our podcast and YouTube channel. Also join us on our newsletter to keep on top of things and read our blog for more information.
Exploring these concepts together is exactly how we keep finding those hidden details in our own backyards.
So the next time you feel the urge to optimize every single second of your time off, remember the dusty bus.
Remember the psychological freedom of surrendering control.
And the empathy built in shared spaces, and the vivid memories forged when you finally remove the barriers between yourself and the world.
Skip the fast travel button. Let the journey take as long as it needs to.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you on the next one.